Hello, hi. I sometimes feel like I really need to figure out an opening for these sorts of things. Everybody always opens and they're like, "Hello, world," or "Welcome to my channel. I'm this and this." And I don't really know how to do that without feeling incredibly put on the spot. What's up, gamers? Um, that's probably not appropriate for this video because we are going to be talking today about Uglies by Scott Westerfield. And I have a different way that my essay thingy actually starts, but off the cuff here, it's going to be an interesting one. This isn't quite one of my normal reviews, as I'll probably say in a moment, because sometimes you read books and they just, I have thoughts about them, but it's going to be a slightly different format. But hey, that's what happens sometimes. So yeah, let's just get into it. I apologize as usual for having a bit of a delay between these, but it turns out reading books takes a lot of time, and also living life takes a lot of time. So, yes, Uglies, Scott Westerfield. The thing is with a series like this and like any series is that I don't know how books are gonna go until I actually start reading them. Like, there might be a few signs pretty much immediately when you open a book. From the outside, it's true you can judge a book by things like cover, description, the author even, but you don't really know how it's gonna go. So when I'm picking books to read for like a channel like this, I have to sometimes think a little bit tricky about it. I have to make some decisions on what I'm going to read based on a variety of things. I mean, when it comes to like YouTube, I have to think about what is going to be a good book to cover. And then sometimes that might be a 4 hour essay, and sometimes that might be like 20 minutes, which is probably what this one's gonna come in. Like, a lot of my favorite videos I've worked on, obviously, are books no one's ever heard of. I still love The Commandment. I still like my review of The Commandment a lot. I request everybody please watch that. But also, I am a disabled benefits receiver, so I need money to live. And so relevance and popularity and performance are all factors that I am continuously conscious of when it comes to picking books. So I always try to do what I want to, but sometimes the stuff that I want to do has to be weighed in terms of what people actually might click on. And so I picked Uglies initially with this in mind. It was a potential series to cover ages ago that I thought a bit more about and decided on back when I was doing my Maximum Ride thing when that came out, because I think a lot of people read Uglies when they were kids or teens, even in like school programs. Uglies is the kind of book that very much had like reader comprehension discussion guides. I very much can imagine that this was taught in like English classes for tweens, because sometimes, you know, they make you read a book and ask you questions about society or whatever. And Uglies has huge tween reading group energy. And I read it as a tween too. This book was really popular, really best-selling, but I don't think it really has had much lasting cultural impact. I have a feeling a lot of people will be opening this video and remembering it, being a bit nostalgic about it. Maybe vaguely you were a fan, but I don't know that it really ever had a crazy big fandom. Obviously, it's a bit older than certain ideas of online fandom that we're used to, and I know there were some presents, but yeah, Uglies. Has it lasted? I mean, has it lasted, and what does that impact look like? That's sort of what we're touching on today. So Uglies is by Scott Westerfield, as I've said. It was published in this very short span of time. It was like 2005 to 2006, all 4 books in the original series. It consists of a trilogy and a mostly unrelated 4th side novel, which was suitably called Extras, and Extras is extremely extra to the main trilogy. Then, even weirder, there was a sequel quartet that was published in 2018 to 2020. I haven't read those, and I didn't read this for this sake. I mostly just want to talk about the original trilogy and the original trilogy's themes, messages, and like effects, as well as, you know, summarizing all of it very briefly. But it's very curious how there was a sequel series. I've never heard anybody discuss it again. I certainly remember seeing the covers for it sometimes on Goodreads, but it definitely never seemed to have that much pull. And its connection to the main Ugly series is not immediately apparent. I believe it only really crosses over in the final book in the series, and so I felt that it really wasn't that important, and also I wasn't really interested in it. Now, again, other reasons. The reason I'm skipping extras is the only thing that's a bit questionable. I'm just going to talk about the original trilogy. Extras book 4 came out again, like, immediately after the main trilogy. While, like, one or two of the main characters appear in extras, it really has very little to do with the original Uglies series. It's an interesting sequel. I remember liking it. It was probably my favorite of the series when I was a teen. But that is, again, it's entirely unrelated, and I don't think it's going to be that relevant to what I'm discussing. It's just a minor thing about my own personal desires to read extras. So, yeah, Uglies. While Uglies is a YA dystopia with some interesting sci-fi ideas and cultural commentary, the books themselves are honestly really sparse on anything but hoverboard action sequences in the woods. Each book in the trilogy winds up turning into a series of not particularly engaging action sequences, rather than really developing the plot, characters, or story too much. So doing a normal full plot summary doesn't work as well for these books as I usually do. These days when I write book reviews, I do it from the book, like, summary. I use the plot summary as a way to go on divergence around characters or plot details as they develop. It doesn't really work with Uglies, because Uglies is mostly hoverboard action sequences. I'm not kidding. And, yeah, I was honestly actually pretty mixed, as you might be able to tell, if I was going to write anything up about Uglies, honestly. When I was reading it, pretty much immediately rereading the first book, I really enjoyed it, and I realized I had very little to say about it besides some nagging worries and then certain content in the later books. And by the end of reading the trilogy, I determined I definitely have enough to talk about, but it's gonna be a very interesting specific angle on it. So, yeah. Uglies, when I first reread this book here, I looked at it with this heavy mix of nostalgia. I used to really like it, and then some adult appreciation as, like, as an adult reading something I read as a teen, I'm removed from it and I can recognize it a lot more as a narrative piece, as sort of a morality play for teens with body dysmorphia. But then book 2, which was Pretties, that was always my favorite, was disappointing as a sequel, but then uninteresting mostly. I took very little notes as I went. And then I hit book 3. Book 3 is called Specials, and that's why I decided to make this video. Because when we talk about the cultural impact of Uglies, and I'm not sure there was one, there was definitely another kind of impact that these books had on teens, for sure, and that's going to lead me to a very strong content warning. And, yeah. The thing is, Uglies features and glorifies, not fully intentionally, but we'll get there, self-harm and cutting to a significant degree. And I'm going to talk about this a fair bit later on. We're going to start with one or two references might be when I'm discussing the plot summary, and then we'll get fully into the topic a little bit later. But yeah, this is definitely a warning for the content that I'm about to discuss. It's impossible to talk about Uglies without that. Before we get into that, though, exactly how self-harm is used in Uglies as a plot device and, like, the very real negative effects of its depiction, I need to, again, zoom back out to Uglies itself as just a concept and kind of help you understand where Uglies sits in YA book history. So, Uglies was first released in 2005, which makes it one of the first teen dystopias, at, like, a time when YA was still really being established as a subgenre, and YA dystopia, as we think of it now, didn't fully exist. Hunger Games was 2008, and Divergent, which is basically what taught publishing how successful a paint-by-numbers trend could be with YA, was 2011. So it's there in this dystopia area, kind of around, like, to me, The Giver, which off the top of my head I don't know the date of and is probably a bit older. But it's sort of at that section where there's been a bit of interest in doing these sort of dystopia for teen stories, but it's one of the first for sure, certainly one of the first most successful ones. And like any book that is defining its own genre like this in a way, Uglies is fairly different from its descendants while still carrying, like, certain hallmark elements. Like, one teen girl does get caught in a love triangle and bring down a government, but it's a lot less clean and honestly less basic than, like, Matched or Divergent. It's not just that straightforward, it's sort of more incidental, but you can see the bones of the later YA books that would become famous for using this exact plot structure. Uglies 2 is by Scott Westerfield, and that is an author who's had a number of novels before and after Uglies. When you look at a lot of YA authors, and if you think of like your typical YA dystopia author, a lot of the time people get a contract to do like one series, and then the series maybe doesn't perform well enough. They don't usually have another one. There's obviously, this is not a blanket statement, but a lot of the time authors might write like one really successful YA teen hit and then sort of be stuck with that. Either working on the same universe for ages, like I don't even need to say her name, or maybe just not publishing any more books. It's kind of this common thing, so Scott Westerfield having books before and after of a variety of different series, I mean, it shows something which I believe, which is that he has certain writing chops which are often missing from your typical lazy YA dystopia. I haven't read a lot of Scott Westerfield stuff. I remember I read his Leviathan trilogy when I was a teen, and I extremely love that. And from that and a lot of elements in Uglies, I can say that Scott Westerfield has a lot of really interesting ideas. He's somebody who engages with the ideas and world-building aspects of writing genre fiction like this, which is often exactly what's missing when it comes to YA dystopias. A lot of YA dystopias understand that their concept is, we need to make a society where there's one stupid rule of some kind, the stupid rule is vaguely social commentary, and then it just falls together. Where like Uglies has something like that, but there's a lot more thought behind the world building and the technology that you can tell it's by someone who actually likes sci-fi, as opposed to somebody just working within the genre. So Westerfield is pretty good at his world building and his concepts. It's elevated just a little bit above. I'm not saying it's a perfect book, let alone series, definitely not. I have a lot to critique in Uglies about like his writing, the characterization, and just so many of the decisions made. But it's you can tell that there's a level of attention and detail that makes it pretty okay overall. Certainly, the first book alone functions as like a classic dystopia you could burst out to some middle schoolers and have them write an essay about it. I think that would go over fine. I think it's probably happened before. But the later stuff gets messy, and this intro has been extremely long, so let's just cover the plot of the trilogy. Book 1, which is called Uglies. So, again, this is going to be a little bit more succinct than my usual summaries. I'm chopping out a lot of minor characters and other action things, but I'm going to give you a good overview of the entire trilogy, its plot, and like its world, which is one of the most key things to it. So Uglies is set in a far-ish future, it's about 300 years, of extreme cultural change, particularly around social roles and conformity. All people are heavily segregated by age and thus sort of their function in society. So young children are called little lees. They live in these endless suburbs, and then from the age of 12 to 16, they're called uglies. Uglies live in isolated dorms, so they're encouraged to basically run free, bully each other, and act ugly while young, and then dreaming the whole time of when they turn 16, which is when they turn pretty. Pretties have a mandated full-body surgery to become just that, like pretty, according to committee, with all of them looking very nearly identical. They all just move to New Pretty City across the river and function basically then as wild young adults, non-stop partying until they eventually age out of it. Another surgery then turns them into what's called middle pretties, and with it another very well-defined life stage, acting as parents or maybe holding certain key jobs. Crumblies are the final life stage, again segregated to their own just endless neighborhood to grow old and live with endless surgeries. So the main focus of the series is obviously on the uglies and later pretties, which are the young adult roles. But I'm explaining the other age groups, even though they're not very important, as a way to illustrate the world fully. This is a place where everyone has a set role, and the borders of that is generally surgery specific. The names of each group are less a dystopian gimmick of like having lots of capitalized names, and much more a reflection of the culture. Each is simple and a bit stupid, because everyone in the society is simple and stupid. It's probably, honestly, on purpose that suddenly the world doesn't call children children, they go, oh, those are little lees, and then you turn to an uglies, and then your pretties, and then your crumblies. Actually, I think that's a smart decision in the world building that he uses such weird slang like that. People do not think outside this system at all. They live in isolated cities, they know other cities exist, but cities just lead to conflict, so they pretty much don't bother each other. They're just self-sufficient cities in the middle of the wilderness after an apocalypse ages ago. And people don't think outside the system, such as our protagonist, Tally. Tally is like anyone else in the world. She's not unique at all, and waiting to become less unique with bated breath. That's what's normal. The Societies and Uglies is obviously a very extreme version of our own, where everyone is too busy dreaming of fitting in and being pretty at last to notice the eeriness of their world. Everyone is happy here with recyclable clothes and smart technology everywhere, and while there isn't anything to worry about, especially since about 300 years ago the Rusties, aka us, destroyed the world with our reckless technologies. But now everything's eco-friendly and peaceful, and everyone can just be happy growing up until it's time to be pretty, and be pretty until it's time to be an adult, and so on. The commentary here works well because it's supposed to, as does the world. It's not just that the society exists, it's also that there's plenty of explanation for the people within it on why it must exist, and why they must be happy accepting it. This is a level of world building I really appreciate when it comes to a dystopia. It's backwards justification. When you look at any big cultural shift, one of the main things that has to happen, and that tends to happen, especially when it comes to maybe lying to people like they might be doing in this world, it comes with a justification. People have to make up a reason, even if it's not a logical reason, a smart reason, or even the truth, to explain why things have to be the way they are. And Uglies knows that. They blame older humans for reckless expansion, for wars. They teach children that this is a fairer system than what we have now in terms of genetic lottery. That once some people were more attractive than others, and that was the true source of all human conflict. Differences. Like, this is a world post-race, quite specifically. Everyone is a vague olive skin, chosen from a limited slider by scientists who talk about the ideal human face being pure biology. They discuss how human brains are just wired to want to look at certain people with symmetrical features who look an exact way, and that the differences make people too upset, and that leads to all problems. And so, we have this world of near-identical people who all accept their near-identical lives. You know, it's rather than accept the notion that we just should in real life, which is people are different and it's okay for people to be different, somebody has looked at human history and decided humans are too stupid to be trusted to learn to treat other people fairly. And there's probably, I know, there's a lot of people today who honestly think that prejudice is so ingrained into the human mind, we would be better off if everyone was identical. That the only way to remove prejudice is not with acceptance, but with removing all factors that could create prejudice. And so it's one of those things where in the justification, I would argue against that. I would say that's not an accurate way to view how humans function. But also, you can hear the logic in it and understand why somebody, especially in a society like this, would hear how everybody destroyed each other in nuclear war because of differences and be like, we live in a better world now where everyone looks the same and acts the same. Now, of course, the other secret to this world is the brain damage. People, after the old humans wrecked the world, really did decide humans were too stupid to choose peace on their own. So the pretty operation at age 16 gives every pretty a small lesion in their brain, a bit of damage that renders them happy, compliant, and just a bit vague. Some people later can have these lesions removed or altered, like older adults in specific job fields that require reflexes and intelligence, like fighting fires. But the majority of the population is kept docile and just simple-minded. People who notice this change from ugly to pretty, from rebellious kid to party-loving teen, chalk it up to just growing up. Everybody, you're in your own memories. People just think to themselves, I used to be different and wild and rebellious, but I grew up. I got pretty. I just grew out of it. Sneaking out after dark, pulling pranks is all kid stuff. Adults go to parties and have fun and don't care about stupid things like rebellion. So Tally, if you remember her, is our lead character then, and she is destined then to bring all of this down. She starts out as extremely typical. The last of her friend group to turn 16, she's lonely and bored until she meets Shay, a girl in a similar situation. While Tally loves making mock-ups on her wall screen of what she might look like after the surgery and dreams of reuniting with her friends across the river, Shay is less enthusiastic. She teaches Tally how to hoverboard, which starts as like a fun thing Westerfield enjoys, making it into like a realistic tech gadget, and then it winds up dominating the majority of the series, and I hate hoverboards now. Shay also, though, slightly hints that she doesn't want to get the surgery. She has some reservations, and that thought is impossible to Tally, as everything in their society revolves around teaching children they are ugly now, but they will be pretty and happy later. But Shay just doesn't seem convinced. She seems to even like a little bit of her current appearance, and that starts Tally on her own path of confusion. She's slow, though, to really question it, and that's okay. Like, it's actually better in a lot of ways to have a lead who more represents a typical teen with self-image problems, and who doesn't learn at all to necessarily, like, love herself, or that all bodies are beautiful. Rather, the takeaway lesson is more to question the idea of beauty standards, that there is any right way to look, and that society has the right to choose what somebody should look like, and that maybe a society enforcing one correct appearance might not be a good one. I honestly think those are more valuable lessons, especially in a book like this. Like, body acceptance and body positivity is great, but destroying the whole idea a body can be wrong and that going against society is important is kind of a better lesson, especially in a book like this. It's not just that you're beautiful the way you are, you don't have to change. It's that, I mean, the book also goes a little bit into that. But it's also a lot more just, why does society have the right to decide what you look like? Why does society have the right to control how you want to be? That's more the message, and that's a good message. So, anyways, Shay winds up running away to join The Smoke. The Smoke is a secret off-the-grid group in the wilderness trying to live in the old ways, like a village. And Tally is then recruited by Special Circumstances, these are secret agents who enforce the rules of society, to chase after Shay. If Tally doesn't go, she won't get to be pretty. She doesn't want to go chase down Shay. She, at this point, sort of respects Shay's decision to try and leave. But she also knows that if she doesn't turn pretty, she will just be a pariah for the rest of her days. And she doesn't want that. She's 16, and this is what her whole life has always been towards. So she doesn't feel like she has any other option. Tally and Shay reunite in The Smoke after a lot of hoverboard traveling, but then get caught up in an annoying love triangle with a very boring boy named David, which causes them to fall out. Tally changes her mind about having to betray them. She wants to then live in the smoke. She quite likes it there, but she throws a special tracking necklace in the fire, and that activates it, causing the specials to arrive and destroy the smoke. Shay is forcibly made pretty while Tally escapes, and at the end of the first book, Tally then willingly turns herself in to be made pretty so that the surviving members of the smoke might experiment on a cure for the brain lesions. I hope that makes sense. That is the plot of the first book. Mostly that's the world of the first book, and then the 2 paragraphs at the end, the plot of the book. So, as that stands, you can kind of understand why I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty fine story about questioning authority and beauty standards. She winds up liking herself. She cares about the environment a bit more by actually living in it. And then there's some sequel set up in terms of, oh no, drama and other things. But it's pretty good. But then we kind of just keep going, and as good as the idea and the base is, the rest of the series is not. Book 2. Book 2 is called Pretties, because they're pretties in this one. So, in Book 2, Tally and Shay are both pretty, and both can only vaguely recall the smoke. Like other pretties, it seems like just unimportant kid stuff, and they care more about their cliques and having fun. Tally, though, is especially still haunted by something, like her brainwashed head is not quite right. She can't quite let go of these memories. She meets a boy named Zane, and they get obsessed with feeling bubbly, as they call it, which is basically clear-headed and lucid. The smoke is able to get Tally a letter from herself confirming her consent on the cure and the experimental cure, which comes as 2 pills. Now, Tally finds it while hanging out with Zane, and she's not sure about taking it. She's still very pretty-headed, as it were. She's just vague. She's not sure if she should take these random pills and this letter from her future self she doesn't remember writing, but the police are closing in, and they decide to just split the cure between them. These are 2 pills that were given to her, and they take one each. And this is a bad idea. It is a cure in 2 pills, and they each only took half of the cure. On one hand, it's hard to fully blame Tally for half her actions in the series, as she's always some form of brainwashed, pretty much, except for in the first book. And even in the first book, while not directly brainwashed, she's brainwashed by societal expectations. On the other hand, though, Tally, despite all of her brainwashing that she's constantly breaking out of and getting back into, is genuinely a really unpleasant protagonist most of the time. She makes some incredibly bad decisions just every step of the way. Pretty much all of the bad drama in these books is her direct actions, and anyone reading them wants to pull out their hair and be like, you could have just done something different there, Tally, but she never does. So, Tally and Zane have both taken half of the cure. They start to feel more and more lucid all the time, though Zane is plagued by unnatural headaches and illnesses. Pretties aren't supposed to ever get sick, so he's very reluctant to even go to the hospital, which Tally drags him to once because of these unexplained illnesses. They try to wake their friends up from the brainwashing with big adrenaline-rushing stunts, but they don't reveal that they took the cure for their own safety. Shay, meanwhile, is missing for most of this, notably, similarly holding on to her forgotten memory-based issues, but just sort of abandoned by Tally in favor of the hot guy Zane. When Shay learns about the cure, she's furious at Tally for not sharing it with her. They started this together. And Shay splits off from their friend group to form her own clique of cutters, who self-harm in order to feel awake and break through the pretty-headedness. We're gonna get there. Tally is quite horrified on seeing this, but again, we're gonna have to talk about that one a lot more in a bit. Tally and Zane eventually break from the city once more to flee to New Smoke. There, she finds herself repulsed by how ugly her once boyfriend David is, and pledges her love instead to Zane, who seems to be dying. The inventor of the cure explains that the pills had to be taken together to work. So the cure was in 2 pills, and those 2 pills had to be taken together to work. They were not supposed to be split up. One pill contained nanobots, which ate the lesions, and the other contained a way to make the nanobots stop eating brain tissue. Zane ate the nanobots, and Tally ate the stop, meaning Zane's brain is Swiss cheese, and Tally never actually was cured. It's an extremely stupid cure design that didn't include any instructions, like, hey, you have to take these 2 pills, like, 1 day apart. Nothing on that matter. It was just 2 pills, unlabeled, go ahead. It's hard to imagine that you would get it right based on the information Tally had, but splitting it in 2 was 100% extremely the wrong way. Because Zane has permanent brain damage, and Tally never actually got the cure. But yeah, that does mean that Tally cured herself of brain damage. Vaguely, it's the placebo effect, and the idea that, of course, the brain is very elastic. Vaguely, it's a message of, like, how anyone can work hard enough to unlearn harmful cultural things. Like, sure, I'm speaking really good. It's also, though, a serious case of, like, the main character getting to be the most special person ever. So special and cool, she just cures her own brain damage by just being around. Certainly a lot of characters tell Tally this, about how she's very special and impressive for curing herself. Immediately, though, after arriving in New Smoke, the specials again show up and blow the place down, this time tracking Zane through an implant in his tooth, because Tally made him go to the hospital that one time. The book ends almost exactly the same as the first, with Shay showing up now remade into a special, and taking Tally in to be turned special herself. So, Book 3, Specials. Specials are a unique class of surgically enhanced people. They have lightning speed, strength, reflexes, healing, everything. They can see through walls by touching them and feeling the vibrations. They have sharp teeth and nails and faces designed to be instinctually frightening to humans. Shay and Tally are now both specials, and both cutters too, as the leader of the special program, Dr. Cable, recruited all of Shay's cutter clique to work as specials. The cutters, you see, were able to sort out the cure of their brain lesions with their self-harm, which really impressed Dr. Cable, who invented these specials. And it turns out that in the society, uglies are encouraged to be rebellious, and those who can keep any amount of level-headedness as pretties are recruited as specials for their superior brain power. Shay and Tally are now obsessed with adrenaline and superiority, feeling disgusted by everyone else below them and removed from humanity to purely act as weapons. They are again brainwashed, but do not realize it. They continue to hunt down the remains of the Smoke, especially after the Smoke abducts one of the cutters with the aid of some very high-tech stuff. To find them, they work on a plan to have Zane, who is still pretty but just far more ill, escape to the new Smoke and just trail him all the way there so they can find this new Smoke and solve this problem of the new Smoke abducting one of their friends. It's not actually called the new Smoke, it's just called like Smoke or the New Smoke, but considering they've already been destroyed twice in 2 books, there you go. As part of this weird plan to release Zane to track him, they break into a military armory and carelessly, utterly destroy it with an ancient nano weapon before they embark on their wilderness journey. So, yeah. As you may note in these brief summaries, I'm skipping a lot of stuff again. Each book involves a very long sequence where Tally, usually separated from her group or alone, has to venture for weeks in the wild with the aid of a hoverboard. The main theme in Uglies really is extreme hoverboarding, and it's kind of ridiculous how repetitive this becomes. So, Shay and Tally become separated on their wilderness trek, and Tally continues alone and trails Zane as he heads to the new Smoke. It turns out, though, that this time, rather than a small camp of straggly survivors, the Smoke has moved to another city entirely, San Diego. Tally's city is like maybe Portland, Oregon. Diego has never had as strong a separation between the age groups as Tally's city, and with the Smoke now producing cures, most of the city has fully revolutionized into a place of freedom that welcomes new ideas and runaways. They're even expanding their borders, which is like a big no-no because everyone's been drilled in about how expansion is what destroyed the world. People are diversifying their appearance too, with all sorts of wild cosmetic surgeries just going over the top. Tally meets with the other cutters, including Shay, who explain that off-page they've been cured of being special, and try to convince Tally to get cured as well. Tally refuses and has to be kept in a cell to prevent escaping or killing people, unable to really grasp or care that she was forcibly turned into a super unethical murder weapon against her will. Shay then explains that when she and Tally destroyed that armory with a nano-weapon earlier, casually, their city blames it on Diego and now is preparing for war. This somehow does make Tally suddenly sensible, and she returns to her city to try and stop it, especially as the attack happens where her city attacks Diego, and that winds up getting Zane killed, who was again just, at this point, pretty much comatose of brain damage. Dr. Cable intercepts her as she arrives back at her city, but Tally is able to secretly pierce Dr. Cable with the cure for being special via a needle, and over a few weeks of being prisoner, the unspecial Dr. Cable loses her cutthroat instincts and just calls off the war. Tally is then sent to go get unspecialed herself, but Dr. Cable interrupts, as Tally is now the very last of her unethical specials, and Cable doesn't want all of her experiments eliminated just like that. even though, again, Dr. Cable's experiments were based on brainwashing and rebuilding teens into superweapons against their will, and she herself is no longer special without any feelings for humanity. But I guess that even at her normal human state, Dr. Cable just really doesn't have an ethical filter. Tally then, released by Dr. Cable, still a special, flees into the wilderness to meet up with David, and ends the series declaring herself as the new special circumstances. As the cities are going to begin to undo the PRETTIES system, her role, she's decided, is to be a weird superhuman protecting nature from humanity's greed, so they don't overexpand. Which is certainly one of those themes that is brought up a lot, the view of the current society on our society, especially around the environment and destruction to it. But it definitely is a very weird closing note, where certainly we all experience, like, the cities when reading it as very bad, oppressive places. Them expanding is this interesting thing where it's not really good and it's not really bad. It shows change breaking through the system, but it also is cutting down some trees, which is, a big no-no. So Tally and other people definitely react way more strongly to just the concept of cutting trees than we do. And I guess Tally becoming an eco-warrior of moderation is okay. Moderation's good. But it definitely is one of those endings that is not really that satisfying. She's just like, suddenly, having not thought about this pretty much at all before, it's like, I'm gonna become an eco-warrior superhuman. And the series kind of just ends there. Well, the trilogy does. So there is something I try to make clear when I talk about books, and that's the difference between intention and result. It's very much like death of the author in terms of how much it comes up in media analysis for me. Like, I can often, or try to, tell what the author wanted to do, but did they do it? How does it actually sit? And then when you also apply death of the author to that, you remove those themes as much as possible from the intention, from the person. What does somebody reading this take away? And what does somebody with maybe poor media analysis instincts take away? What does somebody reading for fun come away with, as opposed to somebody reading between the lines very deeply? These are all different experiences somebody can have with a book. Everybody winds up reading a book slightly different. So understanding how messaging can come across, yeah, I think that's an interesting subject. And it's like when I talk about Tender is the Flesh. I know what the author mainly intended to do, and I know what elements in the books are meant to represent the theme, but I believe the end result, stripped of the context of intention and the author, is quite different. Sometimes it isn't, that a theme is something that is delivered 100% or 0% across. Often it just winds up in between. It might be sort of conveyed, but also sort of flubbed. Uglies is a lot like that in its themes. On one hand, the societal commentary is obvious and easy and often stated in really clear text. There's a few different ideas made clear about beauty standards, peer pressure to conform, and environmentalism. But even acknowledging the intention behind some of the messaging, I think a lot of the nuance is just fuzzy. For one, there's something here about individualism and conformity, and it's been plaguing me so much while reading the books. So I'm gonna try to make my point in my head, and I hope it makes sense. So, much like a lot of YA, the main character is notably unique. The message is meant to be that anybody can be, yes, but that doesn't change the fact that we primarily see the world only through Tally, and see little of the idea that anyone else matters. Rather than Tally being one of many, Tally seems to simply be special, able to unbrainwash herself twice, maybe 3 times without effort, just able to survive and be cool and be unstoppable, in contrast to the lack of any other well-developed side characters. Most of these books are hoverboard wilderness survival, so everyone else feels shunted. Tally is our audience stand-in, yes, but also seemingly the only girl in the world pretty much able to, wake up. And waking up is another theme the book struggles with. Conformity is bad, beauty standards is bad, And with those hot takes out of the way, the book also struggles to move past a typical YA, us cool people versus them idiots. And I know this is a very weird takeaway to defend the brainwashed pretty society. I'm not really doing that, but it's undeniable how books about the ability to break out of conditioning still feel ingrained in typical YA hot girl hatred, rather than being about a society breaking out of brainwashing and how everybody in it is a victim, basically. It feels a lot more that it is some cool people get to live, other people are loser sheeple. It certainly isn't an extreme case of it, but Uglies follows a select few people who are able to break out of the system. They're rebels, they're cool kids, and they're not like those sheeple. And sheeple, again, is a bit more limited, but feels like an apt term. Like, remember, it's good to think of books sometimes from the perspective of a 12-year-old who does not know how to think critically at all. I certainly didn't, and the messaging changes just radically. Pretties are brainwashed idiots and victims of the society, but a kid reading these books is more likely to view it not as an allegory, but a real-life comparison. That the pretties are the cool popular kids, but you are the cool rebel kids. The pretty kids are like the pretty popular kids, and you're like in one of those uglies who knows that everything around all of these societies are stupid. And instead of necessarily walking away with the idea that the society stuff is stupid, and so I shouldn't judge the pretty popular kids as being empty-headed and vapid, you wind up with I'm the only awoken one, these people are like NPCs. And that's what I mean when I talk about the themes being delivered well and not well. Rather than build on the idea of the society as a whole and the brainwashing, Ugly's singular focus on Tally and her amazing special adventures make the allegory get lost and bring the not like other girls aspect up far more than it should. I don't think a kid reading these books would really walk away that impacted by this part, though. Like, the reason I've introduced this idea about themes and tweens misinterpreting them is so that we can segue to the topic of cutting and self-harm. So, again, here's the cutoff point. Note it. Okay, cutting. Let's talk about it. Let's get this video demonetized. Or probably just quite restricted in terms of sensitive content. Cutting was very popular in the early 2010s, give or take like a few years in either direction, obviously. And I'm sure it still happens now, but I'm talking very specifically off of my own memories of middle and high school. A lot of kids were doing self-harm. Cutting in particular was very popular. It was also having a moment in pop culture. Emo and scene culture were very popular, and emo became associated with cutting. Certain forms of emo, certainly it's a wide subculture, became associated with cutting in particular. Being linked to the popular idea of emo's subculture in the mainstream was cutting related. It was the subject of many jokes. References to razor blades as imagery was pretty common. One version of the cover of Specials literally features a bloody razor blade, even though they use knives in the book to do the cutting. And self-harm is something which, like eating disorders, can be extremely sensitive for those in recovery to even be reminded of. I mean, that is the case for most triggers, definitely, but very famously, cutting is one of the worst ones for the physical reaction even the word can invoke. It's not something that should ever be taken lightly at all, but it was, and this is kind of an odd word choice here, it was a trend at the time that these books came out. A trend here is not being dismissive. It's acknowledging the fact that, like many things, it spread through peer groups. It's not something that's exactly instinctual, like most things. It's something that's heard of and tried. Like, I was a teen at the time, and I'm speaking from experience from watching a lot of people cut. It was a pretty tough time, middle school. And in the second book, Pretties, Shay starts a clique who cut themselves. This is done because she's angry at Tally for not sharing the cure, and because she too wants to wake up from the pretty-induced haze. And it works. Tally is shocked and horrified by the sight of the cutting, helping convey a message that cutting is not a good thing, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is how it comes across. And in Uglies, cutting is not that bad of a thing. There's no argument against it or reasoning, and the fact that the cutters in fact achieve what they set out to do makes it a lot worse. They achieve, they win, they get something good by self-harming. Because the cutters all wake up and stop being pretties. We have this angry Solon Shay who starts cutting herself to feel alive, and it cures her brain damage and winds up with her being turned into a badass special. Tally is able to cure her lesions with the placebo effect, but the only other example of self-curing is all of the cutters, who then go on to become specials. And this is very, very bad messaging. The purpose of this is not meant to encourage people to cut. Like, I think I can just say that Scott Westerfield did not sit down and be like, I'm gonna write cutting so cool the teens are gonna do it. Obviously, I think he's probably a reasonable person who didn't think that. What we're supposed to take away is that Shay is angry, that adrenaline is the cure to the, becoming lucid, it's the cure, and that cutting just produces the adrenaline. It's something out of place with the plastic-wrapped world of the pretties. But there isn't really much argument than that. The problem, of course, is that it's hard to argue these things. There's not really any argument against self-harm besides it doesn't help, and it's bad. Mental health is a lot more complicated than just saying something is bad, and I'm not really going to get into it. But I'm aware that one of the frustrating things is that when I say there's no argument against the self-harm, but there's ways that make it sound like it's a good thing, I'm aware that there isn't really an argument against self-harm in a lot of ways, but there definitely shouldn't be an argument for it, which is what happens in universe. It just happens because it happens. And we're not supposed to cut. That's certainly what we're supposed to take away. In Book 3, Tally, as a cutter, cuts once and then quits without any real reason. Some characters vaguely frown at her scars as being bad. But again, there's no solid message to anything. Certainly not one that would convince a teen who feels like an outsider, who has depression, doling their mind, that cutting is a bad idea. So, yeah, Uglies presents just a limp argument of cutting being bad, and then so many other things designed to make it seem like an active magic thing. The cutters in Book 3 are a clique of superhuman secret agents who are all great friends. A clique where everyone belongs, where cutting is a communal ritual activity that makes people feel clear-headed. Multiple people cut themselves specifically to think straight, including Tally. She does it once early on, and late after she's like, I've quit cutting, she starts being tempted to do it again purely because she's having trouble thinking, and she's like, this will cure my mind and make me able to think. And it does do that, which is wild. It shouldn't. The book presents several benefits of the act, with the only downside being some rough idea that adults might frown at you, which, again, picture a sullen teen with mental illness, and you realize why that isn't an argument at all. So coming back to the idea of intention and execution of themes, this is all a failure. The author obviously didn't want people to read the books and think cutting would help them, but he also failed to show that in any way. Tally is brainwashed, and Shane is brainwashed and depressed, but that doesn't really matter to a depressed teen reading a book about hoverboarding rebels fighting back against an evil pretty system. And all of this is to say that Uglies hasn't had really much of a lasting cultural impact, but it definitely has had a lasting impact on people's skin. I've heard, and I'm sure I'll hear more, people who have begun or been influenced to self-harm due to how it was written in the series or just reading the series. This is a very unfortunate fact hiding at the core of just Uglies, and when we try to think back on it. The first book of Uglies isn't so bad. The idea of Uglies just isn't so bad. The cultural commentary of Uglies isn't so bad. So is Uglies as a series bad? It's always more complicated than that, really. The first book works. It's very formulaic in how it works, but it gets the job done. It says something about society with an exaggerated mirror, and it does it in a way that's easy for a teen to relate to and enjoy and maybe make think. The rest of the series is not really worth it. Pretties and specials rehash the same premise, and neither lives up to the potential in the details. And also there's all the cutting. There's going to be a Netflix movie soon, which is wild. Like many YA of the time, it was tapped to be a movie many years ago, and that never manifested. I can't imagine the film will be any good, though. I think it will either be cookie cutter basic, or have to reinvent much of the original text to make any impact at all. And it'll probably do a mix of both and just wind up being bland. I did want to talk about, though, the potential for the series and how I'd rather frame it. This is an unorthodox review, and I can do what I want. And also, it can be a really good way to think about something critically. If you want to get started, anybody can be a critic. But if you want to get started on these sorts of things, a good way to start thinking about things critically is to think, what is something that makes me unhappy in this storyline or premise or work or whatever? What would I improve or change? And how would that impact the story? How do I feel that would make it make more sense? And yeah, one of the largest flaws in the series is simply that it is about Tally, when it really should be about Tally and Shay. The two of them are meant roughly to be foils. At every turn, Tally miraculously succeeds and breaks free, while Shay suffers and stays trapped. Shay, though, started as the free spirit and Tally the conformist, but they swap places due to Tally's mistakes, losing her friend to the system and repeated cycles of brainwashing. The spirit of these books should have been exactly that. Tally and Shay's identities changing, brainwashed and surgically altered, but still woven together at every turn. As it stands in canon, they both, like a boy, fall out, and Shay almost entirely fades from existence in favor of a love triangle that even Tally isn't that invested in. I think that there's no better way, though, to talk about beauty and societal roles than through a story about two girls and how they perceive themselves and each other over all of the changes and conflict that growing up entails, especially in a dystopian world where growing up involves forced brain trauma. They should swap sides each book and then break free together at the end, seeing each other as friends and enemies and friends again. Like, what's a better representation of the chaos of forced social conformity than just a girlhood friendship?